Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. Today for this video we're going to be talking about my favorite baits for fishing riprap. And if you don't know what riprap is, essentially riprap is chunk rock that is strategically placed in certain areas to reduce or eliminate erosion. So, you know, it's very popular for putting around like causeways. It's really popular for, you know, the edge of roadways or the edge of canals and things like that. And of course around, you know, people's homes, around people's docks and things like that, where they're just trying to reduce the amount of erosion. But riprap is one of the best year-round structures that there are. I can't think of many types of actual structure that hold bass year-round, but riprap is definitely one of them. They definitely have some. Riprap has its very key times during the year, like. Think about Guntersville. Guntersville is all about those bridge areas. The bridges are huge on Guntersville, and that's because, not because the bridges themselves are great, but it's actually the riprap that creates kind of a funnel area. So you've got these solid riprap walls, you know, that are bordering the roads and the causeways that are going over these major creeks. And then you've got this one little bridge that creates that little funnel, that little opening for the fish. And the riprap itself, because it's chunk rock, it's got a lot of crevices and holes in it. It's very irregular, which means that it's really good for you know, things like crawfish or bluegill to, you know, use that as their home. They can hide in the crevices and all that. And so it is just teeming with life year round. So it is definitely not a bad idea if you're running out of good ideas on where to fish to just go to some riprap and pick up some of these lures. But I'm gonna go over kind of a handful of the baits that I'm definitely going to have tied on when I approach riprap. Some of them are made to be used, you know, kind of around the riprap, but not quite bouncing into the riprap, and others are made to just get right down into that riprap. A key thing to remember when we're talking about all these different baits is the right tackle for fishing riprap. Again, you're talking about very, very sharp, jagged rocks that you're fishing. So having the right type of tackle is super important, especially the line. So one of my favorite types of line is fluorocarbon for fishing riprap. Most of these baits I'm going to be using fluorocarbon. In fact, pretty much all of them I'll be using fluorocarbon, but having the right fluorocarbon is really important. You want one that is specifically formulated for, you know, abrasion resistance. That's why I use Seaguar Abrazex, and so I use it in a variety of different line sizes, but I'm just going to throw that out there. You definitely want to use the right type of fishing line around riprap. Same goes for like fishing, you know, around zebra mussels, which sometimes, you know, you've got riprap and zebra mussels, and that's a pretty crazy situation as far as abrasion goes. But all right, since we're talking about abrasion resistance and all that, let's talk about the baits that are essentially going to be fished in and around the riprap, not, you know, away from them. So the very first bait that I've got to mention is probably the best riprap bait of all time, you know, for all different times of the year. This is not one that you have to fish in one season or another. This is one that you fish you could fish it all day long, every single day of the year. So this right here, good old jig. This is the Z-Man cross eyes flipping jig. Okay, so it's this is the 3/8 ounce version. We're going to talk about that in a bit, but we've also paired it with the Helicross trailer. I think that's a really, really good trailer overall. But, you know, this jig and many others are really, really good for fishing around riprap. But the biggest key to fishing a jig around riprap is the fact that you don't want to use a heavy jig. The heavier the bait that you're going to be throwing inside the riprap, and this goes if you decide to fish a worm or a Ned rig or something like that, same type of concept applies. So the lighter the jig, the less likely it is to get wedged into one of those holes and for you to have to break off that bait. I mean, I can't tell you how many fish, or not fish, but baits I've lost over the years in riprap because I was using too heavy of a bait. So the cross-size flipping jig, the lightest version they have is the 3/8 ounce. So that's the one I generally use. I like this style head, you know, that archy style head for fishing riprap. I generally don't like football jigs. I feel like they're so wide, you know, at the head, and they just get wedged into the rock a little bit more. Now that's a little bit different than usual because I love football jigs for fishing around rock, but I generally am fishing around more gravel, smaller, you know, grade type, you know, rock and hard bottom areas with a football jig. But with a flipping jig like this, it's a little bit more streamlined. Yeah, it's got a little bit wider of a head than some other designs, but it does come through the riprap pretty well, assuming that I'm using a lighter jig. And another thing that really tends to help with not having your jig dig into the riprap, into those crevices, is the trailer. So I like to use a somewhat bulky trailer, and the great thing is the Helicross is made of Elastec. So in Elastec, it is very, very buoyant, and so it will actually keep these claws up and almost kind of buoy the whole jig and kind of keep it from digging into those really tricky crevices in the riprap. So you know, I like to use a bulkier trailer in general for fishing riprap with my jigs. But again, it's all about fishing the lightest jig that you think that you can get a bite with, because you know, you're just going to get frustrated with heavier jigs. You know, anything over a ½ ounce is going to get stuck a lot on riprap. Now sometimes you can't help but fish a heavier jig because the fall rate is what is the most important factor for triggering a strike. In that situation, you just got to deal with the you know, the occasional snag. But a jig is definitely the best year-round riprap bait, in my opinion. Just drag that thing around riprap. The biggest key is to find, like, you know, and this goes for all these different baits, but find the irregularities in the riprap. So a lot of times, you know, you might have a very consistent, you know, angle that the riprap is going into the water and meeting with the bottom contours. But then you might have an area where they decide to, you know, while they're constructing that area, that riprap bank, they dump more rock either by accident or on purpose, and it creates kind of a little, you know, point that comes out. So always pay attention to those things regardless of the bait that we're talking about. All right, so the next bait that I want to kind of highlight here, and this is actually two different baits. Actually, there's quite a few of baits within this category that I'll use, but these are my two favorite. The first one is a square bill crankbait. Okay, so we're getting into crankbaits now. Square bill crankbait is a really good search tool. So if I'm fishing a riprap bank that maybe, you know, bottoms out in 6 feet of water, you know, kind of more of a shallow riprap bank, a 2.5 or a 1.5 a square bill is a really, really good option, because a lot of times what's happening, especially, you know, when you've got those big transition periods, you know, where the shad are moving into the back of creeks or you know, the back of areas, you've got a lot of shad that kind of get pushed against the riprap, and a crankbait is one of the best ways to imitate one of those bait fish. And you know, you're just essentially covering water with it. You kind of parallel the riprap and just make sure that you're maintaining contact with that riprap. That square bill will just bounce off and deflect off of the riprap and get a good reaction strike. So, but with that, again, you want to make sure that you have a very good line that you're fishing with, and you retie often. And another thing, whether it's this crankbait or the one I'm just about to show you, make sure you change your hooks often. We obviously pay attention to our line a lot, but when you're fishing riprap, you're talking about very, very hard rock. and you wear out your hooks very, very quickly. That's why I switch out I keep a bunch of different treble hooks on hand. My Hayabusa treble hooks are like as sharp as they come, and they do last a long time, but when you're fishing riprap, you definitely want to be cognizant of that. If it's not like easily grabbing, you know, sticking to your fingernail, you need to change out that hook pretty quick, because you're gonna miss some opportunities if you don't change it out. So the Hayabusa treble hooks are the ones that I use. I love those treble hooks, but you know, whatever you use, just make sure that you change out your treble hooks as you fish riprap with crankbaits. The next crankbait that I really like on riprap is when the water's a little bit deeper and maybe a little bit clearer too. And I've got the tags on there right now. That's gonna drive me crazy. I need to get the scissors, but this right here is the rock crawler, okay? Rock crawler, you know, this is kind of designed after the you know, old wiggle warts. And I love throwing wiggle wart and still do from time to time, but honestly, this Spro rock crawler has become my absolute favorite for that category of bait, which is essentially a bait that goes over rock very, very well. It has the right amount of buoyancy to keep you kind of able to back away from rocks when you get into the real thick riprap, and it has a very, very erratic action where it bounces off cover and just is all over the place. So this bait right here is a really good one if you're fishing a little bit deeper, maybe the riprap's topping out to 10 feet, or that's where the fish are, you know, 10 foot or less. And the fish are really, really just oriented right to the sides of the riprap. This is a really, really good crankbait for that application. There's a couple others that I really like. You know, the DT6 is okay. The thing I don't like about a DT6 is a lot of them, and I say a lot of them because they are made of wood, so they're not always consistent, but a lot of them aren't as buoyant as I'd like to see with fishing riprap, because I really think that buoyancy is really important with crankbaits fishing riprap, because you want something that can kind of back away from that riprap without snagging as much. You know, I end up fishing suspending baits, you know, baits that kind of just sit there in the water column and you snag a lot more. So in general, you know, those are my two favorite crankbaits to use on riprap. And then we're kind of getting into the baits that aren't necessarily, they're being fished around riprap, but they're not necessarily you know, making contact with the riprap. Okay, the very first one I want to talk about is I mean, you saw Hank Cherry win the Bassmaster Classic with it. You've seen many people fish this bait around riprap and causeways and things like that, and it's just a really good bait when you've got shad right on the riprap and, you know, getting pushed against that riprap, and especially during the colder months, and that is a jerkbait. Okay, this bait right here, this is the Berkeley Stunna. Hate saying the name, but it is a really good jerkbait. It's actually become my favorite jerkbait overall. I've used it this year or last year. The first fish I caught on it was a 10 1/4, and I caught a lot of fish over 6 on this jerkbait. So it's a really, really good jerkbait, and this bait, you know, suspending jerkbait in general around riprap is just it's one of the standard it's one of the standard baits that you're going to want to throw, especially during the colder months. I don't throw it near as much during the warmer months, but you're talking about fall, you know, pre-spawn, and you know, anytime the water's cold, winter time too, this is going to be one of the baits that I have tied on 100% of the time when I'm fishing riprap. And with this, you're not making contact with the bottom. You're really trying to figure out, you know, how the fish are oriented to the riprap, and put this presentation right above their heads. So like I'll use my forward-facing sonar, just kind of see where the bait fish are, where the shad schools are, and look for those bass around them, and just try to present it that way. And if you don't have forward-facing sonar, just parallel the bank or 45 degree the riprap bank. You know, cast it close to the bank to where you're confident you're not going to dig into the rock at all, because these are terrible at getting snagged. They are very, very snaggy baits if you actually get it in the rocks. And then just, you know, work it, you know, back to the boat, and oftentimes you'll figure out where those fish are in the water column, and kind of be able to dial it in a little bit more. But a jerkbait is one of the best riprap baits, especially during the colder months. Now this other one is another reaction bait. It's made to be fished in the water column, kind of, you know, mid-water column area, and it is again a shad imitator. And it's one that I don't think a lot of people have really used specifically for riprap as much in recent years. And in general, I mean, it just hasn't got as much attention. But I think it is a big mistake not to use this bait, and that is a spinnerbait. Okay, this right here is a 3/4 ounce version of the Z-Man sling blades. I've got a little Hayabusa trailer hook on there. This is a really, really good bait in general for fishing riprap, and just slow rolling it down those riprap banks. Again, just like the jerkbait, you're fishing kind of 45 degree against those banks, and just slow rolling it down the sides of those banks. Not touching the bottom, you're staying about halfway up in the water column, and you're just slow rolling it. Okay, and spinnerbait is kind of the original Alabama rig, is what I like to call it, because it does imitate a school of bait fish extremely well, better than anything did up until when the Alabama rig was introduced. And so it does a really good job of imitating, you know, those schools of shad, and especially in decent water clarity. So like if you have a couple feet of water clarity, you can throw a spinnerbait as long as there's bait fish around, and that's what the fish are targeting. But a spinnerbait is a really, really good option. You don't have to fish the 3/4 ounce version. You can fish any different size. It just depends on the depth that you're trying to achieve, and also the speed of your retrieve. But spinnerbait is legit. It's definitely, and I would say it kind of mirrors the same type of situations where you want to start throwing a spinnerbait as the situations that you throw a jerkbait. Kind of colder water situations are generally, you know, when I start seeing a lot of shad activity against those riprap banks. Also, I can't believe I didn't think about this earlier, but also when you've got a shad spawn. Shad spawns are a big deal when it comes to riprap. So when you do have those shad flickering on the surface during the shad spawn, they're just really close to that, laying their eggs. A spinnerbait is really good, as well as all these other, the crankbait, the jerkbait. I went to Eufaula a couple years ago. We had a great shad spawn during the tournament, and I caught a lot of my fish on a you know, moving bait like a spinnerbait and a crankbait. So in general, those are the baits that I like to throw. Each of them is a little bit different as far as the time of year and the conditions that you may want to throw it in. But all of them are just absolutely deadly on riprap. So let me know in the comments below, did I leave any baits out that you like to throw on riprap? I know that there's a lot that I also throw on riprap, but these are my absolute favorites. So I've just kind of condensed it down. But anyways, guys, thanks for watching. Make sure you like, share, subscribe. I'm gonna see you out on the water. Take care.